Ooh, that's bright. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Steve Hewlett, not that that matters in the slightest. This is David Abram, and that plainly does matter. He was last night's lecturer, and we're thrilled to have him here this morning. He's kindly offered to undergo a bit of an examination, perhaps. Anyway, and there'll be time for questions and contributions from yourselves, so do be thinking about that, because that'll make this altogether worthwhile. I suppose maybe just as sort of, and you can tweet, of course, and there is an app. If you've got the festival app and you want to either submit a question or rate the questions already there, you can do that. Otherwise, if you tweet on hashtag EdTVFest, it'll pop up in front of me, and it'll pop up in front of me. Anyway, so just a few words from last night's speech. Freedom, hunger, fear, and blame. And I thought, that could be the Channel 4 motto. No, in all seriousness. You talked about Middlesex Polytechnic. So you come from Magdalen College, Oxford. What did you study there?
Modern history.
And you apply to Middlesex Poly, and you get rejected, and you keep the letter, and you put it on the back of your toilet door. What else is on the back of your toilet door?
Nothing, just that letter. Use it to inspire me.
So, are you in the habit of keeping rejection letters?
No, I mean, it was something that fell out of a file when I was moving a few years ago, and I laughed at it because I thought it was an amusing memento of something that I'd pretty much forgotten. But I suppose I partly remember that because after the 5 years on the board of Creative Skillset, which obviously is very focused on training opportunities, I do remember the TV industry as it felt to me as a 21-year-old graduate, felt like a very closed environment. At that point, Channel 4 was only, 2 years old, and a career in television was something that there was no clear pathway. There was nothing in the careers office or anything. It was almost like a sort of thing that happened in an old boys network sort of way.
So how soon after your rejection from Middlesex Poly did you get picked up by the advertising industry? How quick did that happen? Weeks?
Yeah, I can't really remember. Maybe after that, later that summer, I applied and I got in.
I mean, looking at your career, it's been. And I don't mean this in a bad sense at all. It's been commercial, really, from the outset.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel sort of slightly ill-equipped, not being a creative yourself?
No, because I think the sort of boundary of what defines a creative and non-creative person is pretty broad, isn't it? Because I think, the job I did in advertising was a bit like being a producer in the sense that you were coordinating a creative process on behalf of a client. You were looking at it from a business point of view, but also from a creative point of view and a consumer point of view. And so the facilitation role in the creative process was one that I've always enjoyed and been involved with. But, I think that, there's a very broad range of disciplines in the creative industry. So this thing of what's a creative and what isn't creative, I think is quite broad, really.
But you've never been a program maker?
No, but from the very start I've been involved in filmmaking and photography and production and script writing at a commercial level. So that's been my livelihood. And I've been commissioning programs now for, when I was in America, I was responsible for several £100 million budget. So green-lighting shows and dealing with their development and their production and their evolution and their marketing is something that I've been doing really for quite some time. Okay,
well, to try and get you said an awful lot last night, and I say thank you very much for that. It's proved quite, it's got people talking, which I think is the whole point, so that's all to the good. In terms of the big picture that you sort of gave us, do you really feel that Channel 4 is in some sense under threat? Because if you put all these things together, and we'll talk about the detail in a minute, but in general, do you think Channel 4 is under threat?
No. The reason why the speech was structured in the way that it was is that in the centre of the speech, what I said is, look, we are standing on our own 2 feet. We've survived this recession. We're back at, in a surplus situation. We've nurtured our reserves. So running Channel 4 as a business right now, the answer to that is no. But the exam question that we posed ourselves was, if there is a public service review, and if there is the Charter Review that influences that, the conditions that surround Channel 4, the public service system that we're part, that I think is under threat, and that's really was sort of, I suppose, at the heart of the speech.
You talk, I mean, do you think it's on anyone's agenda to sell Channel 4?
No, I don't think that's, that's a live debate, but obviously...
So all the stuff about profit maximising and the bad things that would happen is kind of...
The reason why I raised that was because it still interests me when I sort of travel around and talk to people that often they see Channel 4, it has adverts, who actually owns it? The understanding of the model is not as broad as perhaps it could be, and almost what would be lost if we operated under a commercial model isn't fully understood.
But is anyone suggesting that you should?
No, but I think it's part of my job as the chief executive is to constantly remind people of the value of the model. So I took the opportunity of doing that.
I mean, you could just as easily say that, if it was a question of finding 20%, if you cut the commissioning teams in half, if you sold Horseferry Road and went to Manchester or Leeds or Cardiff or somewhere, and if you addressed senior executive salaries, you could probably produce a 20% saving almost overnight.
But I'm
in other words, without any impact on the screen.
I'm puzzled by the nature of the question because what I was describing yesterday was the 20% that would be going into, that would be a one-off saving, wouldn't it? Okay, so for 1 year...
You'd reduce the cost of running Channel 4 by 20%.
Well, Channel 4 has 800 people in it, in a building that we own. And in terms of the spend, the share we have versus the number of employees, we're the most efficient broadcaster in the world. So there isn't an efficiency problem.
The most efficient broadcaster in the world?
Well, if you think about it, we are publisher broadcaster, okay? So we have only 800 people, but we spend £600 million a year, and we have a portfolio share of over 11%. That's a very efficient organisation that is driving 25,000 jobs in the industry.
So you don't think that Channel 4 suffers any sort of inbuilt inefficiencies?
No, well, look, we're constantly operating as leanly as we possibly can. I mean, you may remember the day. How many people worked at Channel 4 when you worked there, Steve?
No idea.
Well, I think you find it was over 1,200 people. So Channel 4 is now a very lean organisation, and so. But the exam question isn't to do with whether you can create a one-off saving with a building, whatever. It's really to do with the model itself, and we are in a privileged position that allows us to not have to deliver that margin to any shareholders in order to do all the things that we do in the indie sector.
Is the model essentially stressed or not? No. Your predecessors used to say, as you know, and we've discussed this before, it's so stressed it's going to break, and unless there's some other source of finance, all of it stuff.
No, it's challenging, but we are achieving our objectives, and you can see this year the momentum in our prime time schedules, and so the answer to that is no.
So you talked about consolidation in the rest of the industry, and we'll talk about indies in a minute, and you talked about broadcasters, Viacom buys Channel 5. Malone et al. Sniffing around ITV, so on and so on. In terms of, and you talked about Pfizer, as if AstraZeneca and Pfizer, and as if there's some sort of similarity. In practical,
do you not think there is?
Well, I'll tell you in a second. In practical terms, what is the impact on Channel 4 of all that manoeuvring? Well, because I'm struggling to see it.
If you read the speech, it wasn't. I didn't raise this. I was making a speech, a MacTaggart speech, and the MacTaggart speech, the brief is to talk about the industry that we're all in, and to talk about fundamentals that the whole country is affected by.
Yeah, but forgive me. But you, just to clarify this, you paint a picture of an industry facing momentous change.
Yeah, so your question is...
The implication being that public service broadcasting is at risk if someone doesn't do something.
Yes.
We'll come on to what that something might be.
Yes.
But I'm just asking you specifically, do you think Channel 4 is in any way adversely affected by any of these manoeuvrings?
The PSB system is affected.
How?
Definitely. Because of the fact that the PSB system right now still delivers 80% of the investment into the indie sector, and that is where the risk capital, the major pool of risk capital for creative innovation still sits.
Why wouldn't that continue?
Well, it can continue as long as we strengthen the PSB system that the whole country has benefited from. So the speech is about, here's what we have been doing, here are some changes that we can introduce to strengthen that system, because if we don't, there is a sort of direction of travel towards major parts of the industry. I mean, it surprises me, Steve, given your background, that you would not choose to describe a year in which so much of the ownership of our industry has changed.
Well, Viacom bought Channel 5.
Well, yeah, but all three, and a major shareholding in ITV is changing. So if you were to extrapolate all of those
it's clearly
things,
consolidating, I take the point. But I'm struggling to see what impact it has.
Have you ever worked for a US corporation?
Pardon?
Have you ever worked for a US
No, I've worked with
corporation?
them, I haven't worked for one, no.
Well, I've worked for US corporations for half my career.
Does that mean you're sort of one of them, really?
Well, I think I'm qualified to speak as to the experience of what it's like to answer to, as a division, a regional division, as opposed to a sovereign entity. You know, I'm not making a value judgment about it, I'm just flagging up.
Well, you are, you're saying it's not very good, really.
No, the speech doesn't say that. The speech says, just wake up and recognise the difference. It's about where decisions get made.
Okay, but you specifically said, if I recall, again, I don't have it in front of me quite, but you talked about decisions being made in New York.
Yeah.
You know, if Malone and if Liberty Global did end up buying ITV, then, you know, you've got John Malone, as you said, another evil figure for the kind of...
Didn't say evil.
All right. Well, you've got sort of Dr. Evil number 1, Rupert, and Dr. Evil number 2, John. Anyway, but the point being that these people make decisions from abroad that won't necessarily suit the needs and interests and tastes of British audiences, as well as the system that we now have, which is still pretty well domestic.
Steve, the critical thing is that, you know,
these
are public service licenses. Okay?
But just saying, but here's the question: in the event that foreigners who don't really understand Britain and who make decisions for other reasons based in New York or Washington, wherever they might be, Colorado, I don't see why that doesn't play to Channel 4's advantage. And if what they do, if they cock it up, that's all to your benefit.
Well, yes, but I've been asked to do a speech on behalf of the industry, and I think I'm just making observations about the industry that I'm part of. So these are, you know, if you take the case of Channel 5 and ITV, these are channels that have public service obligations. When I've ever tried to explain public service broadcasting to an American, it's tough. The concept of it, the concept of how this regime operates is difficult to grasp in America. And that's a cultural issue. And the speech was as much about the values of our industry as it was about the mechanics of it.
But you talked repeatedly about public service broadcasting and 2 broadcasters you said that we, the British people, own. That's the BBC and Channel 4. You didn't say a lot about ITV, really. I take your point about ITV is still a public service broadcaster. It has licence obligations, and any owner would have to meet them.
Yeah. Yeah, but it would be very interesting, wouldn't it, if that acquisition does take place, because you'd have a free-to-air public service licence in partnership with a pay platform. The first time that's ever happened in this country. I think it'd be something the regulators would probably want to have a look at.
Yeah, maybe.
Have you thought about that?
Oh, I'm not sure I necessarily see the
Oh,
issue
so you
myself.
could use a free-to-air public service licence.
Yeah. Provided you meet the licence terms, I don't see what the problem is.
But you could use it as a partner into a pay platform. You don't think that's an interesting a new regulatory environment to consider? I think it's a big problem.
Maybe, but of course it's hypothetical. Just let me ask you something else that came out of this. You talked about a parade of Americans, and you made some quite disparaging remarks about American corporate creative culture.
I was teasing.
Teasing. Okay, were you also teasing London Live?
Yeah.
Seems slightly harsh, that.
Well, we get teased an awful lot, don't we? And, you know, I was making that point in the context of local television. There was a big debate for many years that the government proposed local television. We were all put under, you know, some pressure to get behind it. We all questioned it. It's happened, and we see the results. And I was making the point that if you want public value and public interventions, it has to be well designed and well implemented, and Channel 4 remains a very good and successful example of that. That was why I made that point.
Compared to London Live?
Yes.
Okay, there's one for the headline writers. So, talk about indies. again, we talk about consolidation in broadcasting or whatever. Clearly, there's a level of consolidation going on in the indies. There was one thing that you said when you talked about how value had been created in the independent sector, and you described it as, you said it created a significant reservoir of creative risk capital.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, if you wake up every morning and have the privilege of not having to maximise the margin of your schedule, which when I ran commercial channels I did, so several months a year I'd spend worrying about my budget and going to America and arguing for my spend. If you're in Channel 4 or BBC position, what you focus on is the audience and the level of innovation and risk that you can optimize in the schedule. And, you know, effectively the privilege is applied in maximizing the level of creative risk-taking as far as you can. So we completely recognize we're in a privileged position, but it's because we can take more risk.
Yeah, I understand. I think I understand what you mean about risk-taking in general. What I'm not sure I understand is what is what you describe as the reservoir of creative risk capital?
It's pretty simple. It's the £1.7 billion that the BBC and Channel 4 and ITV spend with the independent production sector in the UK.
So it doesn't reside. The way I read it, it was as if that was this reservoir was part of the value that had been created in the independent sector. You mean it's the money that's spent on it?
Well, it's the decision-making process that exists primarily at the BBC and Channel 4 to push creative boundaries and to provide opportunities, particularly to smaller companies.
Okay, so you didn't mean some value that sits in the independent companies per se. It's the money that you spend on it.
Well, the value chain begins with that creative risk process, but then it helps to build companies. Those companies then can become attractive for consolidation and acquisition. And insofar as then value is released as a result of that train of IP and programs that sit in those companies, value is then released. And that's a very positive process. So I was explaining that the decision-making process in the public service broadcasters leads to value creation, which then leads to this marketplace existing.
Okay, so I think I sort of get it. But the idea that there is a reservoir of creative risk capital existing in these companies that has been brought into existence by the system, that's not quite what you mean.
Well, most indies don't.
Because what you just said amounts to just value, not creative risk value. I don't dispute that.
Most companies don't start off with a lot of capital. They start off with some ideas and they go to the BBC or Channel 4 or ITV and they get commissions. And that capital then goes into, under the regime that we have, the creation of IP.
So is the reservoir of creative risk capital cash then?
Well, of course, it's capital. It's
money.
Cash? It's money, yeah.
So your analysis is that there are pools of creative risk cash sitting in independent producers?
No, the point was primarily made about the public service broadcasting system making its commissioning decisions which create that value.
Okay. You also talked about, or I took from what you'd said, that you thought that some of the prices being paid for independent producers by the consolidators, whoever they might be overdone. In fact, you said at one point, not even some of the people selling their companies could understand how the people buying them had reached the valuations. Do you think they're overvalued?
Well, if you talk to the people who failed to make the acquisitions, absolutely. And I meet them almost every day. People who say, oh, X, Y, or Z managed to buy this company, but they clearly overpaid. So there's clearly a lot of competition, but that's the market. And if people are prepared to pay, then that's what the market will bear. So in a way, my point is good luck to them. We encourage the open market. We think it's a fantastic thing. But it's just worth observing that it's the consequence of some wider external forces that are creating those valuations.
Again, what's the impact on Channel 4 of any of that malarkey?
Well, I mean... Directly. Presumably we'll get into the conversation about terms of trade, but...
shortly.
In simple terms, if a company starts small and develops sort of partly under our aegis and other public service broadcasters, and then is acquired by a larger entity, clearly there are sort of business considerations in terms of how we interact with them, which we believe need to be recognised differently. And
but isn't it the case that what we've seen happen and seen recently? I mean, all three is a little bit different because quite a lot of the people who started the companies that eventually became all three sort of stayed for a variety of reasons. A lot of them seem to have stayed with it. Not all, but quite a lot. More commonly, a company gets bought. Think of the people who run the garden. I mean, it's their kind of third time round, I think.
Yeah.
So the creative genius is at the centre of it. Did it once, got bought, dropped out. Did it again, got bought, dropped out. So I suppose what I'm saying is that in terms of creative talent, the barriers to entry here are very, very low.
Yes.
So I'm not sure why consolidation is necessarily a bad thing for Channel 4 because it inevitably leads to the creation of the next generation.
No, per se it's not a bad thing, but then it could be argued...
So you don't want anyone to stop it from happening?
No, well, look, we are huge supporters of the marketplace that we are partly underpinning, and that's what I said last night. But it brings you to the issue of whether or not Channel 4, as one of the key props in that system, is receiving a fair deal for its contribution to that value chain. Right. And that's why that was raised.
So we're not overly worried about consolidation on the broadcasting side, provided Channel 4 is left alone or left to get on with its business and not...
Well, no, I also made a qualitative point, didn't I, about... It's back to this broader issue of who's reporting to whom, what are the values and cultural priorities of the entities. So there is no absolute here. One can see large companies being very creative, evidently.
Okay, but provided as a punter, provided we've got the BBC, which is big and all the rest of it, and we've got Channel 4, and we've got other people with public service broadcasting licenses, but let's suppose they're run by Americans. Let's suppose they make mistakes about British culture. They don't really understand what we want and all the rest of it. Provided I've got you two sitting there and you're reasonably secure, I don't think I'm not sure I need to worry about the rest.
I'm glad that you added that caveat, Steve, provided we are reasonably secure.
Well, I asked you whether the model was under stress, and you said it wasn't. So
well, no, I said, you asked me whether Channel 4 was
stressed. Why is this not secure?
Well, there are obviously, the speech is centred around the critical and central value of the public service system. And what I was trying to do with the speech is to
why is it not secure?
Shift the centre of the debate back towards a strong, set of beliefs and understandings around what makes that public service system strong. We all know we're living in an era where the prevailing debate, in large parts of the media, is to criticise and to undermine some of the principles that underpin the public service broadcasting system. It's just part of the competitive environment that we're in.
I don't see where where's the threat coming from, is what I'm trying to get at. I mean, it's chit-chat in the press, that's not a threat. I mean, is there a legislative process that's about to unfold? Well, where's the threat?
Well, I mean, I'm not here to speak for the BBC, but of course there are huge debates going on around the Charter renewal about the licence fee, about the scope of the BBC, all of which, they will have to deal with. But if you combine those debates with all of the other things that are going on, I think it's absurd to say this isn't a moment where you wouldn't want to step back and reset and say what are the core principles and core values. I know the line of argument you're trying to put here, which is, hey, let's just be all deeply relaxed about the fact that our entire industry
I'm not making a line of argument.
It's shifting its centre of gravity, and I don't think you can do that.
When I read the speech, when I heard the speech, it was remarkably light on specifics, and I'm just trying to get you to... I'm just trying to get you to go a little bit further.
Well, I'm not going to, unfortunately, because...
Let's take terms of trade.
Well, can I just say at the outset, Steve, that a MacTaggart speech isn't a detailed manifesto of a proposal which will be the subject of a detailed review that Ofcom are about to undertake. What I wanted to deal with yesterday are the principles. I think it was very significant that I said that Channel 4 would not be an in-house production. You and I know that there are many people out there who actually have said that we needed to do that. And we decided that's not what we're going to do. Okay. So just to say that is not to be brushed over.
Sure. Well, we'll get to this. Just let's talk about terms of trade for a second. You said...
But just to be clear, I'm not going to do a detailed... unpacking of this
today. There's a couple of obvious questions which you can answer if you like, or not. If you take terms of trade, you said it's important that Channel 4 gets properly recognised gets its just rewards from the process. You said it's not the term super indie is now kind of almost redundant, because there are either studios or there are indies.
Yeah.
And of course, there's...
Would you agree with that?
More or less. There are obviously some...
Great, we agree on something.
So, okay, you can see what's happening. You can see what's happening. But in terms of... You also said, so some things won't change. So the presumption on the ownership of rights
Correct.
will not change.
Correct.
And secondly, control of international distribution will not change.
Correct.
So there am I thinking, well, there's only one other thing that could change, which is the share of back end. Is that what this is about?
Well, that's one of the things that we definitely want to discuss. I mean, we already know when companies are no longer qualifying that we obviously are free to negotiate with them more openly, but they start from a different kind of playing level, a different starting point. So a stepped approach, for example, might be one way of ameliorating that. But yes, I mean,
So stepped, how do you mean?
According to the size of the company.
So size rather than...
You could vary the terms.
So size rather than ownership?
In addition to, for example.
So when you hit a particular size, your share of back...
Not when you hit a particular size, but maybe there could be a sliding scale, for example. That could be one way of doing it.
And would that be a sliding scale based upon the amount of work a particular company does for Channel 4?
No.
Or their size in general?
No. But look, again, Steve, this is details that... there are very qualified people who are going to get into the detail of this.
Okay.
But the principle is, do you think that if we spend a long time with a producer, coming up, together with an idea that really breaks out and is an international hit, do you think that getting 15% of the global value of that is fair? Do you think that
I'm not sure.
preconditions...
Whether it's fair or not, I'm not sure. It depends on whether I'm a big company or a small company.
Well, it's to do with the values and the principles that you want to work to. If we want to keep stimulating the indie sector, then specific and strong supports for small companies is something that Channel 4 will always fight for.
Okay, this connects to your growth fund and the companies that you've invested in, but just go back half a step to the terms of trade business. If you've got a small indie, the people that you say that you want to support, and I understand why, if you said to me as a small indie, okay, we'll give you the commission, but we want 60% of the back end, or pick a number, 50% of the back end.
Well, I know what you would say to me.
No,
Steve,
I'd say yes.
have it.
I'd say if I didn't have protection of the law, I'd say take it, because personally, the commission is more important than the back end to me. That's the position most small companies are in. If, on the other hand, I was a bigger company, let's say I was called Wall to Wall, I was been bought by Warner's or somebody, and I'm doing a drama with Channel 4, a drama series, and let's supposing I'm bringing 25% of the budget to the drama, in other words, significant financing from the market, so on and so on. If you say to me, look, 15% is not good enough, we need 50%, I'm going to say, well, finance it yourself, because we can't do it.
Yeah, and that's what already happens in the market.
But
there are many large companies, as you know, that still have indie status, are protected by their indie status, right, where we can't have that negotiation. Which clearly, Steve, you would accept is absurd. Come on.
Just to be clear then, the small indies are not the problem for you.
No.
Even if they only give you 15% on what turns into a global hit. Mm-hmm. Big companies that are not qualifying are not a problem.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think...
Just to be clear...
let me ask you this.
The issue here is big companies that are still qualifying indies.
Yeah, well, big American, investment analysts who are sitting there doing valuations on UK production companies based upon the continuation of the terms of trade. Was that the intended consequences of the lobby in this industry 20 years ago that rightly fought for the rights of the small guys, that now these valuations are being pumped by the continuation of a regime for which none of this was ever imagined? I think to defend the current regime and say that it needs no alteration whatsoever in a circumstance in which no one envisaged that we would be here 20 years on is clear, intellectually incredibly difficult to defend.
Okay, I do understand the point, but just to be clear,
so we're getting somewhere.
But just to be clear about this, it's not the small indies, it's not the non-qualifying indies, because you can negotiate with them.
Caveats. The non-qualifying indies, if they buy an indie, start from with an order book and with a set of relationships that starts from down here. So this cliff edge is really problematic.
Yes, but all I'm saying is that over time you can, with non-qualifying indies, non-qualifying suppliers,
over 5 or 10 years, you might be able to adjust the deal base, but it takes time. You don't do it overnight. Listen, well, it doesn't happen overnight. If you have an ongoing series, they all benefit from the pre-existing terms of trade. They could be shows that could be in your order book. I mean, you know, shows could be in all three's order book from Channel 4 that will never change for another 5 or 10 years.
Okay. So when you ask Ofcom to look at this system and to assess it and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do, you want them to think about some mechanism for dealing with, at the sharp end, big qualifying indies. In other words...
Steve, I think you're focusing on the wrong area. For us, it's the term I used in the speech was about flexibility. The key thing for us is that, I mean, look, this size thing is one thing, but really...
Well, it's only you raised it, that's all.
Yeah, no, it's there. But what if you're saying what would Channel 4 benefit from in order for it to keep investing back into content in the future, then a more rational approach between primary and secondary rights, for example, and the way digital rights are currently not assumed to be part of the primary commission, is important to us because we think there's money being left on the table. We think we're not working as well with indies, together with indies, because of the way that quite now ancient legislation is restricting us. So that is a positive degree of flexibility that we're seeking. It's yet to be determined whether it needs a sort of deep, you know, rewiring of the foundations of the current regime or whether it can be achieved by Ofcom by other means. But flexibility is really the watchword that we're looking for.
The growth fund, and this, of course, connects because if you're lucky, the companies that you've invested in will get snapped up at some future point.
Yeah, which is why we believe in the market.
Pay lots of money.
Which is why we believe in the market.
So you better hope that for those companies, they don't get screwed by new terms of trade that you negotiate with Ofcom. Otherwise, the value of your investment will go down.
They absolutely won't. Absolutely won't. Listen, if any of those companies get to the kinds of size where that will be an issue, you know, it'll be a high-quality problem.
Okay, good. So
I'm looking forward to solving.
So the 4 indies that you've invested in, what made them stand out?
First and foremost, they're all creatively brilliant, and they're all great people, and that's why I ended this speech by bringing it back to people. You know, this is what this business is, and that's another thing I was trying to say yesterday, which makes this industry different in this country. They've all got great creative track records. They've all got a clear vision of where they're trying to take their businesses. They all had a very clear vision of what they would do with the capital. It's to do with diversifying and expanding themselves creatively, and they had very clear business plans. So, you know, this was a process that we've gone through quite thoughtfully over the period of a year when we announced it, and we're really thrilled. We had over 120 companies that came forward, and we're going to announce more deals in the next year.
Okay, when the pictures of them came up, I wasn't the only person to wonder this. I heard people muttering almost immediately. So first of all, they're mostly over 50, with no disrespect to John Smithson. Secondly, they're all white. And thirdly, they're all companies with turnovers that are big enough to mean that they could quite easily raise money in any number of other places.
Well, firstly, they're not...
So I suppose the question is, how does this fit with your diversity agenda? How does it fit with your ambition to reseed the indie sector when these are already quite big, successful companies that can well look after themselves, and to say they're all over 50 and they're all white?
Well, that's incorrect. Say they all and all, because that's not correct.
Nearly all over 50.
No, they're popcorn, and they're in their 30s. So no, that's not right.
They are all white, though.
The point is that what I announced this week is the first 4 deals of probably what will end up hopefully being, you know, could be over 10 deals by the time we've got through this tranche of the growth fund. And I would like to be able to go back to the board of Channel 4 and say that this has been a great success and get a commitment to expand the growth fund. I mean, the ultimate vision for this, which I hope you'll allow us to see beyond what could be announced in the period of just a few months, is that you'd have a fund that could be well over 20 million, and it could be driving over, let's say, 100 million of turnover in the UK, and there could be dozens of people within those companies that represented nations and regions and genres and backgrounds, which we could all stand back and say the growth fund that it affected. So to judge the growth fund on the first 4 investments, I think is a little bit short-term.
Here's another question about it, I suppose. When it was first being talked of and mooted and launched, it was talked about picking companies that maybe had turnovers down around the sort of 2 million mark.
Yeah, and popcorn have got a turnover of less than that, I think.
But some of these are sort of 10 million, aren't they?
Well, one of them has a larger turnover, but only one of them. I mean, it's kind of 1, 3. You know, they're all sub 5 apart from Arrow.
You talk about reinvesting. You committed yourself to reinvest any returns back into programming.
By definition, we're not for profit, and I don't own shares in Channel 4, so that must be the case.
In terms of the nuts and bolts of the investment, you said that it leaves them free to build their business as they choose, and so on and so on and so on. Can they sell to whoever they wish without your consent?
Well, not without telling us.
If you get the money. But
not without telling us. But no, look, if that's what they want to do...
When you say can you stop them, or can they just go and do it? Is there something in the terms that means that they can't sell without your consent?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into the details of the contracts that we've got, but we can't force... As 25% shareholders in these companies, we can't force them to do anything.
Well, except
if they decide to do something, we will be in a minority position, won't we?
Well, it depends on the terms of the shareholding. There could be a line in the shareholding
that
says you can do whatever you like, but you can't sell without our consent.
Steve, if you want to apply for us to invest in your company...
I'm only trying to get...
Have you explained your conflict of interest, by the way?
I don't have a conflict of interest.
To the audience.
Well, I certainly haven't applied for your growth fund.
Well, the door's open.
Look, I'm just a starving indie. That's my conflict of interest.
You're very creative as a result.
If you see the back of my toilet door, you'll see the conflict of interest. I tell you. Talk about letters of rejection, Christ. And I was adopted, by the way. Anyway, so it is your hope, in all seriousness, that these companies will grow, obviously with your investment as part of it, and so on and so on and so on, and that they will ultimately generate for Channel 4 capital value.
Look,
is it a money play, this?
No, not. That's not the primary objective, because look, we don't have any debts as an organisation. We have reserves of over £200 million. We had a debate at the board. You know, we need those reserves for to maintain the independence of security of Channel 4. But right now, those reserves are sitting in fairly low yield money accounts, because we can't put them into a risky position. So we had this thing, well, could we use some of this money and invest it long term in a way that's more with the grain of what the purpose of the organisation is?
But you want them to produce, but you do want them to produce financial returns.
To answer your question, as long as the return, from a board perspective, as long as the returns are at least as good as those other safe investments, it will have fulfilled more than its objective, because otherwise the money is dormant in the reserves.
Just one other question on this.
Do you get the point?
I do, yes. Yeah. Just one other question on this. It would seem obvious, but it may not be true, of course. It would seem obvious that once you invest in a company in that way, that you produce your own kind of conflict of interest, because you have Channel 4 has a direct financial interest in the success of those companies. So when it comes to commissioning, at some point, if you're not to be made to look a monkey for making a bad investment, then your commissioners had better be buying programs from them.
Well, they're certainly under absolutely no obligation to do so unless they think the ideas are worthwhile. And that's why the structure of the Growth Fund reports into an entirely different part of the organisation and into the board under Glyn Isherwood. And he's the person who's sitting on the boards of these companies.
So no special instructions, no special treatment.
I made it very clear in the speech, no output deals, nothing like that.
Okay. Moving swiftly on, another big thing you talked about was carriage fees, essentially. In other words, the fact that Channel 4 and other public service broadcasts don't get paid by Sky and Virgin and pay TV operators for carrying their channels. I just wonder whether this is quite as thought through as perhaps it might be. I
think you'll find that it is.
As a punter, I'm nervous here that I'm going to end up being made to pay twice. I mean, as a licence payer, I've already paid for the BBC and their services and their channels and the rest of it. As a taxpayer and an owner of Channel 4 by this rather circuitous route, I've been involved in giving it free spectrum and the EPG placings and all the benefits that come with being a public service broadcaster. Am I really, as a Sky customer or a Virgin customer, to be charged again for the privilege of being able to see what I feel I've kind of already paid for?
Well, I'm impressed by the briefing that you've got from the pay platforms this morning, Steve, on this. But the fact is that argument is...
Perhaps you should have spoken to them yourself.
Is ignoring the difference between the commercial PSBs, which actually, to be fair, do not receive cash from the taxpayer, despite your description of legacy...
Free spectrum, yeah.
Well, the amount of free spectrum that Channel 4 gets today is about 5% of our total spectrum costs. So you're over-egging that point slightly. We spend £120 million on distribution a year, of which maybe 2 or 3 million is the implied subsidy of the spectrum. We receive no public money. So let's make that very clear.
But you are publicly owned, or I already own you.
Yes, you do, but...
Why should I pay twice to watch you?
But you said pay, and you're not paying twice. This is a national asset that is not an imposition on the public budget.
Okay.
So let's make... You're using the argument rightly that the public are paying for the BBC. And therefore, in the case of the BBC, it could be argued paying twice.
So they shouldn't get retrans fees?
Well, what I did yesterday was set out the principle that you can't argue against the principle of transmission fees because that is, effectively you're using the BBC as a cover for why you wouldn't recognise the value of ITV.
Just to be clear.
Let me finish. Well, you wouldn't recognise the value of the
you're saying that the BBC, you can see an argument that says the BBC, whereas perhaps commercial broadcasters, PSBs, should, because they're dependent on their commercial revenues, the BBC, licence fee funded, should not get retrans fees.
No, it's not for me to say whether the BBC should or shouldn't. Perhaps they could, but it's for them and the government to have that debate. But what I'm saying is you have the national public broadcasters in practically every mature market in the world, and particularly in America, as you're well aware, have succeeded in proposing and then receiving recognition for the profound audience value that they're offering to these platforms.
But they're not public broadcasters. You are.
But we're free-to-air broadcasters, and there are serious anomalies in the way that the regime works.
But in the American cable system, I have to pay a subscription to get those channels.
Yeah.
Right? Here, I don't. I don't have to pay a subscription to get Channel 4 or the BBC or even ITV or Channel 5 for that matter. It is quite different.
It is, but these are the channels that everyone is watching. And there are many homes now, I think there are 20% of homes that don't have a TV aerial. So in a sense, they're in a position of being nested in a pay platform for a public asset.
Okay, how do you imagine this? Have you any idea of the quantum?
Well, there have been various reports that I understand have been done by Ofcom and the government looking at this. I mean, we shall see. But the figure in America is colossal. It's 3 billion now. It's rising to 7 billion over the next few years.
And it's paid directly by customers.
In Germany and in France, these are material amounts.
Yeah, but it's directly paid by customers.
In what way?
Well, I've got an American cable bill. I've got one here. You can see that the charges from the retrans charge is separated out in the bill as something that the customer then pays. Yeah. So, is it do you imagine that if the regime were to be, if retrans fees were to be introduced in the UK, that customers would pay? Would I, as a Sky customer, would I have to pay?
Well, it'd be interesting to know whether in Sky homes that they have checked that all of their Sky customers have a licence fee, for example.
No, that's not the point. If they
it's an interesting point.
It may be. It wasn't in the speech, but anyway.
No, but the point I'm making is...
But the point I'm making is, if there are to be retrans fees, who's going to pay them?
Well, I saw Sky came out this morning, and it's a rather odd argument to say, we'll immediately have to put our prices up. I noticed that Sky putting their prices up anyway, because they're in a competitive marketplace where they're bundling broadband and telephony and all their services together, and prices are going up continuously. So to make the argument that what would probably be, even if you took the top-end numbers that have been floated around for the total value of this in the UK, it'd be almost a rounding error on the profits of Sky. So to say that they're threatening that they're automatically going to put the prices up for their customers seems to be quite a weak argument.
So the all quantum is a rounding error on Sky's profits?
Sky gave back £750 million
in a share buyback,
to their shareholders in the last 12 months.
So how much is the rounding error then?
Well, immediately...
70?
There have been figures of 200 million or so that have been floated around as to the total value of the PSBs. But we shall see. This is work that Ofcom and others will need to undertake in detail.
Do you think there's any chance of this actually happening?
Yes.
You do?
Yes. I'm confident of it. I think the time has come. I think, you know, the argument that's been played out, which is to say that we're looking for subsidy and regulatory defence, I think is a dishonest one. The fact is the current regime is a piece of government intervention which benefits the pay platforms. Right now, Section 73 allows, effectively, the cable platforms to take the free-to-air channels for free. With Sky, as you know, there's this...
they're required to make them available.
Well, but also we're still required to pay. The government came out without enforcing any regulation and said they'd quite like these fees to go to zero. Sky pretty much ignored that.
Well, the BBC and ITV have both negotiated to the point of zero. You haven't yet.
But what they have done, Steve, is they've given away valuable services in order to get the fees down to zero. That's a very different thing. It's naive to say that these fees have gone away.
Look, I think in principle it seems iniquitous that the broadcasters have to pay. I get the point, although you could argue that of course there are bound to be genuine costs involved in putting you on the EPG, in providing conditional access services.
No, but the point I'm making is that we're being accused of seeking a subsidy when we're really saying that they're benefiting from an intervention themselves. They themselves are hiding behind an intervention. To argue that the media market shouldn't be governed in a democratic society is dishonest. Okay. It's a dishonest thing. And so the time has now come. And I think that
Sorry, say that again. To argue what?
To argue that you don't need regulation of some kind to balance the equation between the public broadcasters and the pay platforms is dishonest.
But your underlying assertion is that it's unbalanced.
Well,
their assertion would be that it's far from unbalanced.
No, their assertion is the free market will decide that you need no regulation, but actually it is a regulation that currently protects the position that they're in. If you go into the history of the regulation, they are benefiting from a regulatory structure which they're trying to maintain.
So would you argue then for a regulatory adjustment which says, okay, let's have a proper negotiation, you do not have to make yourself available?
Well, of course, as I said in the speech...
Because ITV tried that with Sky and lost.
Well, that was a different situation, but as you well know, and I said it in the speech...
Well, it wasn't. In the end, ITV came to the conclusion that being on, in commercial terms, being on Sky, even under these conditions, was worth more to their shareholders than not being on Sky.
But I think you'll notice that ITV are now making a different argument.
Well, of course, look, who wouldn't want the cash, you know? I mean,
well, who doesn't want who wants to give away the value? That's the argument.
That's the key proposition,
Who wants to give away the value for the audience?
Where is the justification for the argument that this is giving away value?
Because
when you're a public broadcaster that I already own,
no, but
why
Steve,
why is
just
Sky
look at it the other way.
More?
What would the Sky platform and the Virgin platform be today if none of the public service broadcasters had ever been on them? Because there was originally an undertaking whereby the channels had to be made available. But those businesses could not have been built were it not for the availability of the channels that everyone wants to watch. So you've got to look at it from the other way around. What would those businesses be? And now, in the case of Channel 4, clearly, we're not in a position to withhold a public asset. So we're at a disadvantage to commercially negotiate this. So what we're looking for is a backstop from Ofcom under a new regime.
Okay. But there's a couple of things I'd like to ask, but what would you like to ask? Questions, contributions, please. I can't see, actually. There's a chap down there, I think it's John McVeigh. Is there a microphone anywhere? Hello? Is there only one? Yeah, and green, next down here. Hello? Hello? Oh, next down here.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Steve. Good morning, everyone.
Tell us who you are, John.
I'm John McVeigh. I'm Chief Executive of PACT, in case no one knows that. Also one of the architects of the terms of trade and leading to the legislation in 2003. For my sins, I've been at PACT the whole time while many people around me have taken new jobs. But I was there. I was there when ITC conducted the review of the buyer power and the oligopoly that existed. And in your speech last night, you basically quite clearly illustrated the oligopoly that still exists. The PSBs still account for 80% or more of primary spend. The ITC report at the time, and I encourage your people in strategy to read it, was about addressing buyer power in the independent market, not sustaining small companies. It was always conceived of at the time that if buyer power was reduced and controlled and regulated, that the independent sector would become the fantastic commercial global success that it has. And I'd point you to the fact that I've done 3 negotiations with Channel 4 in the terms of trade. You have come to us on many occasions asking for new uses, for nothing. 4/7 was the most recent one we gave you, where you got that, where you could monetize and increase your advertising revenue. Producers got paid nothing out of that. So this mythology that somehow you're constrained under the current system from asking for things or negotiating for things, I just don't recognise.
Okay.
I think it is completely
David, so in fact you're not constrained under the current system?
Well, look, John and I will obviously, with our teams, debate this privately. But I don't agree. I mean,
Well,
John,
at the Edinburgh Festival, you made a big speech. Come on.
John started with, and I said it in my speech. I agree with the principles that led to the original terms of trade. There was an imbalance at that time, but to argue that just because we're still the people who spend the most of the indie sector, that we have the same buying power that we did 20 years ago, I don't think is fair. I don't agree with that.
Down here, do tell me who you are. Do indicate if you want to speak, please, because I'll get the microphone to you. Do tell us who you are, thank you.
Hello, my name is Simone Harari, and I'm a French producer. And I was very impressed by your vibrant talk yesterday night. And I felt you had the feeling it was Channel 4 against the rest of the world, so to say. And why wouldn't you join forces with European public services and talent community in a move to, on one hand, protect, but not in a defensive way, but more as a nurturing process to protect European talent, genuine programming, and creative forces?
Well, I think we have a number of partnerships and dialogues going with European broadcasters. The one thing I do always, however, realise in those events is that the Channel 4 model is actually quite unique by comparison to all the public broadcasters around the world because of this completely independently funded approach. So there's no, usually it's a combination of some state funding and some advertising in other, and that makes us slightly different. But I welcome the dialogue, and perhaps we could talk afterwards.
Okay.
David, Martin Stott, Channel 5. I wanted to ask you, you said your speech was about the PSB system as a whole, so I wanted to ask you about a different part of the PSB system, the BBC. Do you think the BBC licence fee ought to be made voluntary and for the BBC to turn on to a subscription system?
No. I don't sit here in this public event speaking for the BBC, but privately I think the licence fee model works. And that's not my area.
Okay. Just let me ask you, diversity. You said that you would be coming forward with proposals at some point in the next number of months. Sky, as you know, came up with this 20%. 20% of all prominent on-screen roles, and at least one black and minority ethnic person in a senior off-screen role for all their new originations across their suite of channels. Now, volume-wise, that's probably not in the same league as Channel 4, but it's a very bold move. Is it one that you A, support, and B, would consider imposing on Channel 4 or at Channel 4?
Well, I certainly would. I want to learn more about it in detail. I'm impressed with the ambition of it, and obviously the whole industry, through the CDN, is committed to genuinely, and rapidly improving momentum in this area.
So specifically, what are you going to do? Come on.
Well, specifically,
it's been a long time now.
Well, hang on. Channel 4 is not the biggest broadcaster as we know, but what we focus on is on the impact of what we do. Okay, and we know when all of the public perceptions that we conduct is the public feel that Channel 4 is a strong place in broadcasting to voice the views of minority groups in society, and that's very consistent, and that's very high, and that's a very large advantage that we have over all other broadcasters. So the public see us as a place that speaks differently to and on behalf of these groups. And I spoke in my speech just about the impact that we've had in many areas recently.
So Sky have said 20%, BBC have said 15% by the end of 2017. What's Channel 4 going to say?
Well, there's lots of detail here. If you're talking about the employment within the organisation, of course we want to be in line with the national average, and we go both above and below it. We wax and wane marginally. If you're talking about representation in commissioning jobs, that's a huge industry agenda which the CDN is committed to supporting at an industry level. It's impossible, Steve, to sit here in such an important and complex area, which does have, legal dimension to it as well, to wave a magic wand. But the message I have for Channel 4 is that we're absolutely committed to materially working with the industry and within Channel 4 to address the spirit of what's been raised there.
And will you put any numbers on it?
It was the creative skill set system which came up with the original stats that created the debate in the first place, so I'm not hiding from this. But we do need a system that also is more consistent in how it measures the on and off-screen diversity, which is why we're investing material amounts of money to make ourselves accountable in a way that Ofcom now recognise.
I think it came in the diversity session yesterday, but I believe that there are in fact more commissioning editors in British TV called Dave than there are black people in the same jobs.
There could be.
I think it's quite a lot.
There could be black people called Dave.
I think it's quite a lot of Daves. I think it's what that probably means. But anyway, let me ask you one other question about Channel 4's performance.
It's going quite well.
There has been a small increase in peak time year on year. Generally, Channel 4's performance has been down consistently.
Generally, what do you mean by that?
Your shares
Under
down
what time
since
period?
2006. Your shares 2009. Your shares down 50%.
Yeah, but everyone's share is down over that long
Your
time
share,
period.
your ratings, and your minutage are down significantly greater.
Are you talking about Channel 4 or the portfolio?
Channel 4.
Are you talking about the demo or
I'm
individuals?
talking about the main channel.
Steve, I'm not going to debate this with you. We're having a great year. We've got great momentum in prime time. We're winning loads of creative awards. I know that you want to.
I want to ask you about the thing that people care more about than anything else, which is the main channel. Commercially, that's the engine that drives Channel 4.
The main channel is up in prime time, individuals and demos. What do you mean, a little bit? I mean, ITV was only up by 2% last year, and everyone had a party.
When you took over, you committed Channel 4 to a 7% share. It's now at 6%.
Yeah, because,
and dropping.
We have an 11% portfolio share. Our 16 to 34 portfolio share is as strong as it's been for over a decade. That is the key demo. So this agenda that you have...
So why did you commit yourself to 7% then?
Well, I was a new chief executive. I was pumping my guys up and saying, we've got to go for it. We're going to lose Big Brother, which we did. And I didn't want us to be complacent. I make absolutely no apologies for that. But the fact that we're sitting here today with our revenues above 900 million, we're back in surplus, 1634 shares at an all-time high, you can't tell me that that is not progress from where we were 5 years ago. Are you telling me that?
I'm just saying that
Do you recognise that?
I'm just saying that 5 years...
Will Steve Hewlett recognise progress?
What Steve Hewlett
no,
thinks,
he's a journalist.
What Steve Hewlett thinks.
It's very important.
Little old...
You're on the radio every week.
What I think...
Come on, admit it, Steve. We've done all right, haven't we?
All right.
He said it. All right.
All right. You've done all right. But not as well as you will do when you buy some programmes off my fucking company.
What ratings do they get, Steve?
They're massive.
Did you do a long programme about Rupert Murdoch?
I did actually.
How do they rate?
Not bad. I've got an app. I've got a question on the app here, which says, it says, where do you get that brand of hair gel from? It's good. Where do you get that brand of hair gel from?
God knows, Boots.
Okay, this is a little bit yes and no, but because we're running out of time. Yes and no. So, you said about BBC Three that it was buried deeper than a lot of radioactive waste. Were the BBC right to take BBC Three off air?
It's not my decision, but I'm delighted by it because E4 is going to get even bigger.
So is that yes or no?
I'm thrilled. Brilliant decision.
If the right job came up at the BBC, would you take it?
I'll never work at the BBC.
Well, is that because you'd have to take a 50% salary cut?
No, it's nothing to do with it. It's because I've worked all my life in commercial organisations.
You'll never work at the BBC?
Never work at the BBC.
Okay. Well, that's jolly interesting. Thank you very much. Now, one last question if there is anyone who wants to make one. Okay. Well, listen, we have come to the end, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your forbearance. Thank you very much, David, for being so open. Thank you.
Thank you.